Hello, my lovelies. Welcome to the Resilience Project. I am your host, Janet Rosales. Thank you for joining me on my journey to dismantle the stigma behind mental health. I hope to foster a safe space for others to join me in sharing their stories and create a community where we can lift each other up in the hardships that are included in life. Welcome to my first ever episode. Today, I will be sharing a little bit about myself, what you can expect from the podcast, and my hope is that at least one story inspires you to foster that strength within you. The first question, of course, is who am I? As I mentioned earlier, my name is Janet Rosales, and I am currently 25 years old, living in the Bay Area with my high school sweetheart and 2 dogs. I am currently in my master's program for counseling psychology and hoping to one day be a marriage and family therapist. On my journey to dismantle the stigma behind mental health, I hope to foster a safe space for others to join me in sharing their stories and create a community where we can lift each other up and the hardships that are included in life. Growing up in a very small town, there wasn't very much of a chance to talk about mental health in a way that we would like to. I think many of us were struggling and maybe even drowning in our own thoughts, but just didn't know how to open up about these things. I think back on my first therapy experience, and that was when I was probably like 10 or 11 years old. And my therapist is someone who really inspired me to pursue this field. I think that I've been interested in mental health ever since. And then in the 8th grade, I had my mind really set on wanting to enter this field. I just wanted to be one stop in everybody's life that can make them feel a little bit more open and maybe even relate to some of the stories, especially those that will be shared throughout my journey here on this podcast. I think the hard part about just being vulnerable and even admitting that you need help, which is always the first difficult step to take, I never realized that I was struggling. I think because I was always doing so well in school, and yeah, I had my moments where I was, maybe a little bit on the low side, but I always wrote it off as just like teenager BS. I think we could all relate to that one. It was just that teenage angst. But as I grew older, especially when I started going to college for my undergrad, I realized that there was a lot of things that I would struggle with and not really pay attention to. And then with the experience of the pandemic, it really just allowed me to kind of sit in all the things that I had pushed off for so long. I think that when I think back to my childhood, I was very depressed for a majority of my life, and I never really realized how much anxiety I truly had. I think a lot of the times it was mostly just being nervous to kind of speak in front of class during projects and stuff like that, but I never really paid much thought to it, let alone gave it a second thought. And I think honestly that's one of the most common mental illnesses that I would say a lot of us have, those difficulties with depression and anxiety that we just kind of brush off and put it on the back burner. But with me being always involved in extracurriculars or even involved in just clubs at school, I never really gave it much thought because I was like, well, I get along with everybody and I'm able to talk to anybody. So why would I let that affect me? Why would I even think twice about it, let alone give it any space in my life to consume me? Also, thinking about the peers that I had around me, I think that we were all just suffering in our own shells and never knowing how to really talk to each other about it. And we were always just too busy to sit down and just kind of share, even what's on our minds. Especially coming from a small town, I mean, you really didn't know who to trust. I mean, secrets would go around everyone. And just the fact that everybody talks to anybody and someone is bound to know you from someone else, it just made everybody so closed off. But as I continue to share my journey in mental health, I hope that I'm able to support you in being able to share your own story and seek help whenever you need it. One of my hopes for this podcast is to be able to bring on guests that share their stories of resilience and how they overcame their own struggles and difficulties with mental health. As I reflect back on my first experience again when I was about 10, 11 years old, I think about how scary I was to kind of just walk into that office and not really know what to expect. And it's not like I was even talking about regular 1 hour sessions. I was probably there at 30 minutes at a time, and it was with my mom, so it really wasn't just for me. I mean, that's Medi-Cal for you, but despite being that short, I think that therapists did such a great job on emphasizing what was the root issue. And for me, a lot of it was down to the things that I faced with my biological father and the journey that I had having a 12-year-old mother. Yeah, 12-year-old mother. And so, we talk about a child raising another child, and even in that in itself was something that I never really faced as a form of trauma. I always thought that it was so cool to have a young mom. And I mean, my mom is so freaking awesome. She raised six individual superstars. And I mean, not to brag about my own siblings or whatever, but like that was the journey that I had with her. And it brought so much hope for the rest of us. Like, if she could do it, we could do it. Especially because she gave us all that room to foster our love in a way that wasn't like super forced, despite everything that we were experiencing at the time. And because of that love, she kept us alive. So when we would go see this therapist, it was just very interesting to kind of see the domino effect that it had on my life. Because again, with my biological father, he wasn't present in my life, so I never really attributed things to him, despite me being sad over things that he would do. But it was one of those things where I was like, wow, you really screwed me over. And it was one of those things where I was just like, wow, like just those moments that left you in awe. And like I mentioned, I'm in my master's program right now, so I'm learning a lot about myself and the things that I experience. And so I'm going to read you an excerpt about one of the journals that I wrote for a class. And this is a reference to what I would witness with my bio dad to kind of paint a picture of what I was experiencing. I wrote, I remember yelling. I remember anger. And I remember the fear. The house is so small that you could hear someone breathing in the next room, so you can only imagine how loud the yelling was. I remember just standing there silently peering into the next room. I remember my heart pounding, and I remember my mom telling me to stay in the room. I remember my bio dad slamming my 16-year-old mother into a glass side table my grandma had. I remember that it was almost like a coffee table because of how small the living room was, despite being a side table. I remember my dad breaking a vase and putting a broken piece to her neck, and then it all disappears. I don't remember the details. I don't remember why it happened. I just remembered and know that my mom would try to protect me from seeing and hearing. But how do you protect a rose from the thorns that already exist on its body? How do you preserve innocence in a house where violence bled from the walls and anger swallowed you alive? Yeah, I know. I'll let you sit with that for a bit. It was the love that made the difference. It was the love that my mom that made the difference. I was being loved unconditionally in a conditional environment. I never realized how much that anger had consumed me. I never realized how much it bled onto me, and that was one of the big reasons as to why I was so grateful for this one therapist and my one experience of therapy, because it was such a catalyst in my life that it developed into this, hey, I think I need some help when I became an adult. And it wasn't so much that I didn't need it when I was like in high school or anything, but it was more again of the fact that I never had that space to sit with it and be like, wow, I do need help. I was never the one to reach out, especially because I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest daughter, the oldest grandchild, the niece, the everything. So it was like I was the one that had to protect everybody else. So why would I ever speak up about it? But again, it was how I was loved that made the biggest difference. Because again, despite all of the hardships that we faced, my mom was always so consistent in my life. And it was her consistency, even with like showing up to school, award ceremonies, even, basketball games, because I used to play basketball. And, just being able to go into my room every single night saying good night and I love you. Because every single night without a fail, my mom was there. And because of that, again, she kept us all alive. When I do talk about my bio dad, however, there's not much about him that I do remember. I do know that a lot of it revolved around my anxiety, my distress, and my pain. Because as a child, I mean, everybody craves a love of a parent. So I always did want him to be present in my life. But again, after a certain point of him not showing up, I just never really cared. For me, my mom was enough for both. And my relationship with my stepdad wasn't always the best, but, for me, for all intents and purposes, he is my dad. He is my dad at the end of the day. So if I ever do refer to my dad, or my bio dad, it's because of that. So, in those moments that I do have with him, all I can think about is that anxiety. It's just a tremendous amount of anxiety. So I have to remind myself a lot that I am safe now and that I am an adult, which means that I can give myself space and I never have to interact with him in any way Because he's also the type of person to avoid me if he sees me in public, even though I've never done anything to him. But that's besides the point. So, yeah, that's a small part of me, and just why I wanted to create this safe space for everybody and for also myself to get more comfortable with the uncomfortable and be able to dismantle the stigma. Because, again, I think that's a big part of it. Despite us being so comfortable talking about, whether that be anxiety, depression, anything mental health related, especially on social media, we're never truly vulnerable, even with ourselves, let alone with the people around us. And it's those things where we have to force ourselves to like be strong, and then that turns us into these individualistic people, and we don't realize how much harm it's actually doing when we try to be brave and strong. Because, you know, in being able to talk about what you struggled with, even if you do talk about just sadness or, even the anger that you might have experienced, it's something that takes strength. And that is something difficult to admit to somebody, let alone yourself. Because again, the scariest place that you could be in is a room with yourself and being able to face your own thoughts, especially when you're into deep areas like that. And as you listen, I want you to reflect on the little things that you might have dismissed. Little things, perhaps you needed to take an extra day off, or, needed to give yourself a little bit of grace, a little bit of self care, and you're like, you know what, I'm not weak, I'm going to push on. I believe that was a moment where you were actually being weak, because guess what? You were ignoring yourself. And that means that you can't show up for anybody else around you. And I think that's something important to reflect on. I think that's something important to sit with. And it's enough to just kind of think, if I'm viewing someone that I loved and I see them going through whatever it is that I'm currently going through, I wouldn't treat them the same way that I'm treating myself. And I would be like, wow, I should probably step back and, take care of myself too. Because if it was, again, your loved one going through it, you would do that for them, right? You would be the one to pause and say, hey, I think we need a self-care day. Or, hey, I think you need to spend a little extra time being kind to yourself. What is something that you would like to do? What is something that you would enjoy to go out and do? Maybe go take a hike. And, maybe not even that grand. Maybe just walk around your neighborhood. Well, that is if your neighborhood is safe. But something that just says, hey, today should be about you. And be about yourself. And then you stop and you reflect that onto yourself and say, hey, I've never done that for myself. Or maybe you're just not doing it enough. Maybe you're not sure what self-care is. And that's another conversation that we should be having. Because a lot of people don't realize that the littlest of things, even things like taking a shower, is a form of self-care. But we're always so on the go. And when we're full of all this sadness and anger, we forget to take care of ourselves. Even when it comes down to the smallest of things that are a part of everyday life. Even taking your lunch at work. Even taking your 10-minute breaks. Those are all forms of self-care that you should be utilizing, because I know many of you are guilty of not taking those breaks. And you may be thinking, yeah, that's not going to solve my 20 years worth of childhood trauma, but no, it's a start. I know it's not going to do that, but it allows you to open up that doorway to where you're like, I should be able to talk about this to somebody. Maybe if it's having that conversation with one of your parents that maybe you just never saw eye to eye, but now you're in a better place and feel comfortable finally opening up that door. Sometimes it's facing the fact that you may never get an apology from that person who hurt you, but you have to make peace with that, because in order to be able to live at peace with yourself, you got to make peace with your past. One of the other things that I like to reflect is on just how close my family and I are. I think that we're really in tune with each other most of the time, and I love the way that we can come together, like now, especially at this point in time. We're able to talk about the things that we did face together that we never really acknowledged, because thankfully my family is finally at a place where we can have that space to talk. And I know that for many of us who don't really have family or anyone that we can say we're close to, I think one of the most difficult parts is just knowing how to acknowledge the hardships that we did face with them, even if we can't include them in the conversation. Because families can be so intertwined that it's impossible to separate the one experience without bringing in the rest of it. And that's okay. It's okay to talk about those things that, maybe your brother doesn't want to talk about anymore. Your sister doesn't want to talk about it. Your parents don't even want to acknowledge it. But you should be able to acknowledge it within yourself, and at least talk to somebody about it. And it doesn't have to be therapy. It doesn't have to be a therapist. But open up to somebody that you do trust. Anybody in your circle. Talk to your dog. Talk to your cat. Talk to your goldfish. Maybe they're a great listener. Talk to your plants. But talk to somebody. I think it's just being able to verbalize it sometimes and think about everything Because again, the smallest of things, if you're not talking about it, you'll never be able to actually process it. Even when we do think about the things that we want to process, you know, even reflecting on myself, I was one of those people who didn't mind sharing. I was always one who would just talk about it. And I don't ever think that I was ever really truly like processing what I was saying. So when I did allow myself to think about it, I was like, wow, trauma has become so normalized to me that I didn't even realize half of it was not normal. And even when I think about that, I like to think that it was that silent part of me that I just wanted it for it to be silent. So it was better for me to talk about it and get other people to feel it for me rather than for myself to feel it for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just didn't want to be completely alone. And I think that was my way of getting around it because, again, it was so much easier for me to just let everybody else think that, I was bad. And, I was like, I'm strong, I'm fine, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect me that much. But in reality, it was affecting me a whole bunch. And as a kid, I always found myself looking for the why. Why was it always me? Why was it always me that had to face the difficult things by myself? Why couldn't someone else handle it? Why did I have to have the answers? And I realized that it wasn't me. It wasn't me that needed to have the answers. It wasn't me that needed to figure it out. Sometimes I was just allowed to feel, and that's okay. Sometimes you don't have to have the answers. Sometimes it'll come back to you later on, and that's okay as well. Even with traumas, you honestly gotta think about the resilience that comes from it. I think about it all the time. That I'm thankful that it was me that had to endure everything. I'm happy that it was me that had to carry all that weight and had to learn how to manage it because I don't think anybody else would have been able to. And not that they wouldn't have been able to do it, but I don't think that they would have been able to do it from my perspective. I think that someone else would have caved under the pressure of all the things that I had to face. And a part of that is also learning how to give myself the space to now be happy, to give myself permission to be happy, because a lot of the times I felt like I didn't deserve to be happy. And as I grow older, I realize that it's okay to be selfish. Sometimes it's okay to enjoy the small thing the world has to offer. And especially given the current climate, like life's too short. Life's too short to just dwell on the things that you can't change anymore and dwell on the things that you can't change. But it's about controlling the things that you can control. It's about being able to sit back and be like, wait, that was kind of my fault too. And then once you're able to kind of own up to that, then it allows you to open up that door to be like, okay, here are the things that I can't change and here are the things that I can. But what can I actually do about it? Like I said earlier, sometimes it's okay not to know. Sometimes it's okay to not have the answers, nor want them, honestly. But I think it's about giving yourself that emotional connection to yourself and being able to invoke that within you. It's a lot, so all of us are just kind of closed off and not willing to want to try. And then when we do try, not a lot of people are honest about what they're actually facing. And a lot of the times, we find that person next to us is probably facing the exact same thing. But again, we're never willing to talk about it and truly talk about it. Again, I don't mean like being, oh yeah, I experienced this when I was younger and oh yeah, well, I'm calling it a day. Like, no, actually say, hey, I had so much anxiety when, my dad went to work as a child. Even as simple as that, it's just being able to normalize yourself and again, destigmatize what is mental health. Because again, I think a lot of people just think straight to the loony bin type of mental health, but that's not always how it is. An old supervisor I had once told me that mental health should be treated the same way that we treat a cold. If you need medicine, then you take it. If you need some rest, then you should do it. So it's not always like the way that you think that like mental health should go. So, again, why wouldn't you treat your mental health the same way? It's still your health at the end of the day. And it's funny because just like colds, mental health is just as common and can affect anyone. It doesn't just affect a certain group of people, but it impacts everybody and it is widespread. Doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter the background. Anybody can experience mental health difficulties, and that affects your daily functioning. It makes you feel tired, less productive, and it could also impact your mood, energy levels, and your overall well-being. So again, if you would treat a common cold, why wouldn't you treat your mental health? By comparing the two, we can normalize these conditions in order to reduce that stigma and encourage more of you to seek help. It can make these conversations more accessible to people and relatable even, because you're breaking down those barriers that we just simply don't want to understand, nor even want to bother learning about. But sometimes it's just about having empathy, not only for yourself, but for others as well. One difference I will always say, however, is that unlike colds, mental health does not resolve on its own. You gotta have some form of treatment. And again, it doesn't matter if that means opening up to someone that you love. It doesn't matter if that means going to therapy. It doesn't matter if it's exercise, perhaps. But it's about finding a balance in which you can protect your mental health and well being in a healthy manner. Emphasis on that healthy manner that also allows you to take care of your mental health conditions. Whether it's, more serious conditions or less serious, it doesn't really matter. But what matters is that you give it the attention it deserves. When I started to give it attention, I was like, I don't know, it was just bizarre, because I was already going into the field of mental health. So I had this other understanding of it, but I was so convinced that I was fine. I was so convinced that I didn't need help. And I mentioned earlier that it wasn't until the pandemic that I really got into my self-healing journey. And, when it started, it wasn't, I don't know, it was just so hard for me to pay attention while I was in class. And that just led me to the discovery of the possibility of me having ADHD, which honestly was the domino effect for everything else that came after. And it just led me to this profound understanding of like, hey, it's okay that you're struggling. It's okay that you need to ask for help. And to be able to admit that, maybe you don't have it all handled, and it's okay. And it may sound like I'm repeating myself, but I just want to emphasize the importance of kind of coming to that understanding within yourself of like, hey, I know this might be difficult to admit and to hear, but it's what I need to handle, which is why I want to bring that awareness to just empower yourself to understand yourself better, to gain that power, to make informed decisions and take control of your own life that allows you to lead a more intentional life. It allows you to recognize your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, everything that is essential for personal growth and mental health improvement. It allows you to make these positive changes and awareness to what is going to always be that starting point for everything that you want to accomplish in the sense of mental health. There you're going to start to recognize and manage your emotions more effectively, which again will always lead to more of that emotional regulation that allows you to reduce your stress, your anxiety, and continue building upon that resilience that you already had when you did face those challenges. And maybe if you don't have the resilience that you wish you had, it'll allow you to kind of recognize and identify where that resilience was, even if it doesn't feel like it was the biggest thing ever. But it allows you to align more with your own actions, with your values and your goals, to make more of a sense of fulfillment for yourself. Because in order to move forward, you need to start in the here and the now. And it's those small things that lead to big changes. Sometimes before you start your day, take a second to just do some deep breathing. Reflect on the positive things you want to accomplish. And if your day doesn't come out the way that you wish it did, take some time at the end of the day to reflect on the good things that did happen. Maybe you spilled your cup of coffee, but that gave you an opportunity for one of your coworkers to invite you out for some coffee, during your lunchtime. Built that little bond that you might have missed out on earlier on. But, I don't know. It's something like that. Small situations like this, though, also allows you to continue to have a growth mindset that enables you to have that personal development and adaptability in different types of situations. Sometimes the small things trigger us, and it's not even about the small thing that happened, but rather a reminder of something that did happen in the past that might have been a lot bigger. And I know that triggers is something that has kind of become a little taboo to kind of even say, but even then you have to understand what is it that is actually affecting you. And sometimes it wasn't about the fact that you spilled your coffee, but now you don't have coffee, and that was maybe a reminder when one of your parents got you in trouble for spilling something when you were younger, and that just brought that back to you without realizing that it could be as simple as just dropping your coffee as an adult. And I'm a firm believer of the butterfly effect. I think that the smallest of things impact the rest of your life, and when it comes to dealing with trauma, one of the biggest examples of that was, what could kids possibly go through? Like, someone losing their teddy bear at the age of 5 can be the most traumatic thing ever. Because you have to stop and realize, what does that teddy bear mean to them? Maybe it was a representation of someone. You don't know that. Maybe it was their only friend, and now they lost their only friend. But just because it's not traumatic to you does not mean that it wasn't traumatic to somebody else. And that doesn't mean that you're not able to sit down and be like, wow, I was really hurt during that situation, even though the other person might dismiss it and say, no, it was just a teddy bear at the end of the day. But when we sit and we think, what is the background of this teddy bear? What is the background and how I acquired that teddy bear? Perhaps it was the divorce between your parents, and that was the last thing that one of them gave you before they split off. It could have been the last thing you saw of a loved one before they pass. We never know. And sometimes we do that to ourselves. We dismiss ourselves because we forget all of the details that surround that, and even that small little thing. It's important to realize that there's smaller traumas. It could be the things that, you don't really think about. And, trauma in the sense, is trauma. But again, that teddy bear represents so much. And one of the first things you could be thinking about was like child abuse or physical abuse when it comes to trauma, or maybe even emotional abuse. But we have to remind ourselves that, again, there's different types of things that we could be experiencing, such as bullying. It could be struggling academically in school, maybe not being able to take notes as fast as your peers do. It could be chronic pain that we simply just never go see a doctor for. It could be things like financial difficulties, or losing your favorite job, having to relocate to a new location, starting school somewhere else that you're not comfortable with, having your partner cheat on you and simply never being able to process that. And you broke up with them, and now you're like, okay, whatever, it's fine, I'll find someone else. But you need to allow yourself to kind of sit with it. See how it's affecting you. See where those big and little things that changed in your daily dynamics are changing within yourself. There are like little big things that can cause emotional distress, can lead to feelings of isolation, low self-esteem, and increased anxiety and worry that we might already have been feeling to begin with, But again, it's those things that we need to talk about, and we can further discuss, how can I take care of myself? How can I take care of myself so that I can take care of others? Especially for those of us who have loved ones in our lives. And that doesn't just go towards family. That could be friends. That could be your neighbor that always says hi to you in the morning, that you just care a lot about because they're a part of your daily life. It could be coworkers that you're close with. It could be your pets, partners. It's just important to be able to encompass that again within you so that you can bring in the rest. As I continue these episodes, I hope that you pick up on the little things within yourself that you're able to reflect on. And I would love to have some of you on my podcast in the future to talk about those little things that you might be holding on to, or, just sharing something that you would have wanted someone else to hear, be able to relate to it. Because I think a lot of us have so many different experiences, and I think that's such a beautiful and wonderful thing, on how we can interact with each other despite having so many differences between us, and even relate in those differences. I want you to think about the little you that perhaps just wanted someone to listen to them, somebody that could have been there for them, and starting to think about that little you that you should finally start taking care of, because it's never too late to take care of that little you. As this first episode comes to an end, I would like you to reflect upon yourself and the little things that you can do to make your self-care more emphasized in your life. I want you to be able to reflect on the little things that you already do and maybe build upon them. Maybe go out of your way to start something new. Self-care is never limited, so make sure that you do something for yourself. In my next episode, I will be introducing you to what mental health is, while breaking down the stigma looks like, and building more awareness. This could be defining mental health, discussing its prevalence, especially in the communities that we surround ourselves in, and highlighting resources for support in which you can seek assistance if maybe you can't afford it, or maybe you would like a more convenient way to seek it. I will also be having my YouTube channel in which I will be adding a video format of my podcast. Maybe not for like the first 2 episodes while I'm still trying to figure out a recording space so that y'all can see me, and have the availability if you would just like to listen to me, which means that I will also have my Spotify, my YouTube, my Instagram, and I'm also working on a website so y'all can have access to either the video or audio format. Now, before you go, I would like you to be aware of 3 resources that I know of. The first one being the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline, available 24/7 by calling or texting. Again, that is 988. There's also the National Institute of Mental Health. It provides information on mental health care providers and treatment options. And last, there's the Trevor Project for our LGBTQ plus community. Again, I hope you all enjoyed my first episode, and I hope that you will continue supporting me on this journey, and I hope to talk to you in the future. Thank you, and see you next time, my lovelies.